Welcome everyone to this People Over Perks live session on why AI readiness is your new business risk. While we wait for everyone to join, let's do some housekeeping first. Please share your thoughts and ideas in the chat as we go. And as it's hard to monitor the chat while engaging in this conversation, we'll also not be able to answer every question. And if there's really important questions we've missed, we'll follow up on LinkedIn, so stay tuned. And as an icebreaker, I would love for you all to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, role, and your location. As most people have joined by now, welcome again, everyone. This is the People Over Perks live session on why AI readiness is your new business risk. So let's set a bit of the stage. AI is everywhere. This provokes feelings of excitement, optimism, and impatience, but also overwhelm, skepticism, and fear. Being in HR can feel even more overwhelming in this environment. And some employees feel truly anxious and skeptical. But AI isn't going to go away. So today we'll step back from the hype and pressure, and we'll focus in the session on how AI can work for people. With the right setup, clear expectations, and upskilling, AI doesn't just drive efficiency, it can spark engagement, open opportunities, and fuel growth. We'll explore this through a panel discussion, and we'll share new findings from our Workforce Trends report. So the goal is to make this topic less overwhelming and more actionable. So you can leave with a clear plan and at least some next tangible steps to turn AI into an advantage, both for your organization and for your people. And we have two really great speakers with us here today. Thank you both for joining us. So I'd love for you to both introduce yourselves. And Melanie, why don't you kick us off?
Yes, hi all. My name is Melanie Ranho. I'm the Chief People Officer at Athena. I'm so happy to be here with you all. As a compliance training company, we are thinking about this constantly, the importance of AI, whether it's from the aspect of risk mitigation and how to protect your employees, all the way to how do we leverage AI and really lean into the opportunities that it presents in a very responsible way. And so I'm super thrilled to be having this discussion with you all. I will popcorn it over to Jesse.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I am equally as excited to be here. I am the founder of Stacked. It's a HR tech database that makes it simple and unbiased for you to kind of search and discover the latest tech on the market, but also the AI for the HR space. And I originally had a background in transformation projects. And so for me, the whole transition from where we are now and going towards this AI first and AI, use within business is really something that I love to dive into. It's something that I love to talk about, I love to research about and engage with, but also from a perspective of not only being, in HR in the past, but also as a business owner now, how am I utilizing AI to, also help me within my business? So there's kind of a lot of levels there, and I'm excited to jump in today, and hopefully you'll take away something from this that's useful and you can use in your everyday. That's the goal.
Amazing. And I'm Jenny Podewitz. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO at Leapsome. And at Leapsome, we build powerful tools along the entire employee journey, from your backbone HRS to the best-in-class performance management and engagement tools. And we really help HR departments to build the processes and use these tools to really unleash human potential for your people and your company in an era of AI. So a couple of housekeeping points. Please share your thoughts and ideas in the chat as we go, engage with one another. And for us, it's a bit hard to engage in all of these questions as we have sort of a lively conversation here. So we'll follow up on questions that we didn't touch upon on LinkedIn afterwards. And just as an icebreaker to get started in the chat, please introduce yourselves, your name, your role, and also your location, as we have folks dialing in from all around the world. So without further ado, I would love to start with the first out of three themes that we'd like to touch upon today. And the first part we would like to speak about is the risk is real. AI excitement without adoption won't ultimately move the needle. So what's the risk here? The risk is the gap between the AI ambition that we have and the readiness and the actual business impact we're seeing from AI. And if we look at some of the data, there was a recent study by Reuters, and Reuters found 22% of companies have an actual AI strategy. And those that did actually had were 2x more likely to see revenue growth. So it ultimately does move the needle if it's done right. And our own workforce trends report shows a similar tension. Around half of employees feel the pressure from leadership to implement AI, but they don't necessarily know where to start. So the bottom line is ultimately it's not AI that's the risk. It's moving too fast without preparing the people in the organization to really follow suit and then ultimately deliver on these promises. And that might even create more frustration because we have mismatched expectations. And yeah, we need to kind of figure out how we tackle this conundrum. So, how can HR balance the CEO or the executive pressure with realistic, people centered AI strategies that ultimately really drive adoption? Melanie, what's your take?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one to me, in particular, just because, as it has been, I'm sure, with most people, it's been super top of mind. And I'll be very candid. Roxanne, my CEO, and I have talked about this very publicly. We had a lot of friction around this early on, where Roxanne was sort of like, more AI, more AI. And I kept saying, but what does that mean? How are you measuring success? When you say more AI, do you mean a specific tool? Do you have a specific outcome in mind? And I want to have empathy for the CEO perspective here because that's important, right? See, there's a reason why there are multiple heads of departments. It's because there is value in bringing different perspectives to the table and having good balance, right? Our CEO Roxanne was pushing for something to move forward, whereas if it was just me, if I was a CEO, we would have moved much more slowly. And so we really had to find this balance around how do you move quickly but do so in a very thoughtful way. And what comes to mind for me is, um, I think that to your point, there is risk on all sides. There is the risk of your employees not taking any action because they don't know what to do or because they're scared of what is and isn't allowed with confidential information. We actually recently learned, obviously, this is top of mind for us because we're a one of the offerings that we have is harassment prevention training. And we recently found that AI agent mode, the new one that came out, can take harassment prevention training for your employees. So you can literally tell AI mode, take this training for me, and it looks like you've taken a training. That's critical for a company like us. That's high risk. And so we realize that by saying nothing, that's not going to work, right? But by driving people forward too quickly, it's also not going to work because they're going to be panicked. And so, what I will say is this in terms of tangible things, where Roxanne and I landed, which I think worked quite well, is Roxanne really wanted us to start moving in some direction. And I wanted us to have some level of clarity and psychological safety. And so the compromise that we came to, and that I think that CEOs, CPOs, elder leaders need to really be thinking about, is how do you continue momentum in a thoughtful way? Where we landed was okay. We're going to communicate what we need to achieve. Hey, we need to have experimented with AI by the end of the quarter. We need to have had two clear outcomes or learnings from it. And in the meantime, I was running workshops and show and tells to build psychological safety in a safe way. So it would be like 1 to 5. Who here thinks they've learned everything that there is to learn about AI? And that question was worded in a way where the expectation is, of course, you haven't. So let's all
Mhm.
accept none of us are AI experts, and let's talk about it. Okay, you're a 4 on the scale. What made you so empowered and bold about AI? You're a 2 on the scale. What's holding you back? Is it a fear of how to use it? Is it a fear of accidentally releasing confidential information? Is it truly just like a lack of clarity on how you could apply this in your own day-to-day work? And so that's all a very long-winded way of saying that I think the real critical key here is it's not one way or another. It's how do you find a balance between the competing drives across any leadership team?
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm clearly also that founder who is asking for everyone to become AI first. And I think it's coming also from optimism, right? So people are having really high workloads and we want to make everyone's life easier. And sometimes we forget there's a few steps until we get there. And maybe just one quick follow-up question to that. Do you mind sharing what some of the themes were that were coming up for people when you were having these psychologically safe conversations around AI?
Oh, totally. And like, let me own this because this was something that I felt bad that I didn't have this awareness beforehand. I personally, perhaps because I'm further along in my career, perhaps because I've gone through enough ups and downs that I was like, we'll figure this out. I wasn't worried day to day that my job was going to be at risk because of
Mm,
AI. And I found that a good chunk of our employees were. They
mm,
genuinely were worried that we weren't leaning into AI because we wanted to maximize our impact, but because we wanted to downsize and we wanted
mm,
to be able to do the same amount of work with fewer people. And so there were many employees that were actually just scared. They were averse to AI because of job insecurity. There were other employees who genuinely believed there's no use case for AI in my role. I'm a salesperson. What do you want me to be using AI for? I'm selling, I'm talking. And really, what they learned as we were doing these AI show and tells, as we were educating about ChatGPT, is oh, did you know that you could have a workflow where Gong or Chorus or whoever is listening to your live sales call, automatically taking a transcript, and then by the end of your call, it will have auto drafted a follow up email with next steps and links to resources and a calendar invite to schedule that follow up call. That's amazing for a salesperson because that's everything they hate. A salesperson didn't go in because they like writing follow-up emails and taking notes, okay? They like the human aspect of things. And so, that conversation really surfaced, "Oh, here's what a use case for me looks like. Oh,
mm,
here's what it looks like in action." We had people who, were too scared to admit, "I don't actually know what a custom GPT is,
mm,
and I don't know how to build it." And so to be on that call and be like, "Well, we're gonna build one live for you so that you can see." And now you can start to understand the different use cases and
mm,
applications for your own role. Those were some of the biggest themes that we found was just fear and like fear of saying that they were behind and didn't know the things. A sense that I don't see a use case for AI in my role because so much of
mm,
AI is vague. It's AI, but we're not using actual specific terms or use cases or tools. And the third one is just that truly job insecurity.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that's such a powerful story how you really got to the sort of better understand the problem. And that
Mhm.
I'm sure it's very, very valuable for Roxanne, your CEO, as well. Um,
Definitely.
I think Melanie has been an amazing translator here between the people and the executive or the leadership. Jesse, maybe from your perspective, what questions should HR ask at that translator, or in general before jumping into any AI tool, project, strategy? Like, what are the questions to ask?
I mean, it's a good question. I think a lot of people have that same feeling of like, what should I be asking or what should I be doing and what tech should I be looking at? It's also like such a big bucket of like, what could I do? And there's so many use cases and so much tech out there that it is a very valid, like, what do I do now? kind of question. I think it comes down to a few things. And I think Melanie touched on a few of those points, which is I think there's three levels of kind of transformation in the business or level of change that we need to go through. One is the kind of organizational system level, which is like, how do we as a company operate and our principles? And it kind of touches everything in the business, the culture, the behaviors, the mindset around how we work. And how we work is changing with AI. And that in itself is a project, right? How we operate and how we do as a business. So I think those larger organizational impactful changes need to be a lot slower, a lot more considered, and have a lot more of a vision to them before you jump into like really heavy tooling that's going to change that operating space. So thinking about if you think about what tools and what can we do and what was like quick wins versus bigger projects, thinking about that in these levels. So the first one being that kind of organizational impactful level, which needs a lot more thought through, basically a lot more time and energy put into it, usually a lot more money as well. And then you have the team level, which is Melanie kind of touched on that team level where people can now have workflows that, you say, okay, as a sales team, we're going to have this workflow, or as a HR team, we're going to have this workflow and it's going to push this. And we're now going to do this for that workflow within our, it doesn't affect other people, but it's like what we're going to use within our team that makes us all as a team kind of faster, better, quicker at our jobs, whatever. It gives us more space. So I think those kind of tooling are good, but they still do have a level of adoption. There is a level of change in that. And so those should also be questions around, is this really adding value to like the team and as a collective enough and at the right time? So this comes back to like what is the business strategy? What are your biggest, what are you actually trying to achieve as a business? What's going to move the needle the most? And that's conversations you need to be having before you jump into tooling. So I think a lot of people just think, there's tools and so we should use it. It's like, actually, what is the most important thing you should do with your money as a business now? Like, are we hiring a lot? Maybe we should focus on these components that we know are really broken, or we know we're going to, the EU AI Act is coming. We know we have really bad foundations. That's like critical, stuff we have to invest in, whatever it might be. So 2 levels we're at now. 3rd level is like individual. Individual level is where you have a lot more space for experimentation. It has a lot less risk attached with it. You can usually get things done and kind of upskill on the side, kind of within your job. And that's where you kind of, let's say you have your AI tool, whatever it is. Maybe it's your ChatGPT. Maybe the business allows you to use that, or you just use it on the side and you don't put confidential information, but you use it as a buddy, right? That's like not really affecting anyone but you. It's just making you better and faster at your task. So it's like task level execution. That kind of stuff, like where it's just like you, generally it's good to experiment there. How is this helping me in my day to day? How can I be faster and better? Can I share this with other people? What is the risk and compliance of like me putting data in those roles questions? But I think this like team and organizational level need a lot more thought through energy. That being said, it's hard to say what is like the one thing people should be asking. I think for me, it always starts with, and I said it before, is the value add. Where is this driving business? Is it the right investment now? Because there is a lot of tech and you will get pushed by a lot of vendors and you will be like, you need our thing and you need it now. The tech bro stuff on LinkedIn is like very, very real. You feel like you're behind. But I think MIT came out in about July this year and they said, they did a research and they said, enterprise investment into AI deployment isn't really seeing like moving the needle on the profit side. So like companies aren't seeing the profit. So 95% of companies are not seeing profit, like meaningful profit change or meaningful like benefits of these AI deployments. So for thinking about that, we're like, okay, we just throwing money and throwing time and energy at it doesn't make sense. It needs to have a clear, thought through, like this is the needle. And that's the bigger organizational change that generally gets you. Then they also said in this report, which I found really interesting, was that an external tooling, or I think it was tooling, whatever word they used, someone could look it up and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was that external tooling is 2 times more likely to have a success in a business, a successful value in a business, than internal builds. And I think that internal build is something that people are always experimenting with. And I'm not saying not to do that, but it is quite interesting at like, asking that question, do we buy or build is also a question when it comes to like adoption, right? And I think there's fun in building, but like, am I to build tech or am I hired to like make sure we get our job done and deliver the value to the business? So it's, there's always a balance. I could go on forever topics.
I'll jump in just with a real quick. Here are the 3 questions that I found most helpful with Roxanne on my end, which it was, what are you trying to achieve and by when? How will you know if you achieved the thing? How are you measuring success? And if you had to prioritize, what is the order of priority here? And the reason I say that is because for us, it was a really big unlock to recognize that actually the highest priority was less about employee utilization in our day to day lives and more about incorporating it into our product. That was the number one priority. And it just helped us focus a little bit more because you can only spend all of your energy in so many areas. And so to be able to say, all right, we want 70% of our energy on building AI into the product, 30% on employees internally using it. So we can sort of like take our foot off the gas here a little bit and just put our efforts there. Again, I just find that Jenny, feel free to push back. CEOs, understandably and rightfully so, are often like, do all the things now and right away. And to be able to help focus. Okay, but which of the things is most important? Let's start there. And we'll put some effort on the rest, but not all of the effort on all of the things. And I've just found that to be really helpful.
Yeah. No, I think, thank you both. I think really, really great thoughts about thinking about the vision for the company, like really within the teams, the priorities, the actual problems, the value add that Jesse you touched upon. How do we get into experimentation at the individual level within certain guardrails, and really focusing the discussion, as Melanie hold us accountable to on the true priorities. So I think that's a really lovely segue into our second theme. So let's actually move there. There's one poll in the chat. Please check that out. So that doesn't go missed. And I think it gives you a bit of an understanding where you all are at, who listen in today. So I think the segue that we already started touching upon is, so if organizations aren't yet fully ready or still trying to figure it out, so how do they become truly ready? And I think that was an interesting point you already touched upon, Jesse, like what's external tooling, what's built internally, is AI plug and play, or are we still all trying to figure out where we can best actually use it and maybe not use it? And what systems, data, skills, mindset, time is ultimately actually needed in terms of really leveraging the full potential for the business and again, also for the people. And I think what's interesting is in our workforce trends report, 38% of employees said they can't actually keep up with the pace that leadership expects. And I think there's an interesting question of what do you need to put in to then actually get faster with AI? And 50% of employees say they actually need stronger AI skills to fully leverage the technology to manage their workloads. So I think that's an interesting question of how quickly and how ultimately in the quickest way we can actually generate true business and people outcomes. So let's focus like on that, maybe the 30% side, Melanie, where it's about internal transformation. How do you successfully transform an organization or make those first, at least baby steps to more of an AI native organization? What's the easy stuff? What's forgotten?
Yeah.
How do you really truly get it to land?
I think the biggest fallacy that has been propagated around AI adoption is that HR is the one that should be running it start to finish by themselves. It just doesn't work in the same way that it doesn't work for HR to own culture. And what I mean by that is I think there's a three-way partnership here. The um, CEO, in my opinion, is the person who is responsible for driving through a combination of vision and accountability. Because let's be real, the CEO is the only person who actually has the power to hold people accountable. If you don't do this thing, I will fire you. Okay, that's the extreme, but they have that power. There's no world in which I can say as an HR person, do this thing or I'll be very sad. That doesn't really help. Okay. HR is responsible for empowering, enabling, facilitating in a really thoughtful way. And then everyone else is responsible for executing. And when I think about this, do I think that that means, oh, okay, so then HR is responsible for empowering, enabling across the company? Yes and no. Yes, in that I think it is helpful for us to put in the structures that will enable this. No, in that I do not think anybody wants me telling engineers how to adopt AI or which tools to use. And so the best strategy that I would recommend for anyone who's in an HR position and is trying to empower is to really talk to your leadership team in two ways. So one is I think the most critical thing is let's talk about the employees, sure. But let's start with the leadership team because the leadership team, they're the ones who have accountability over their individual departments. And so they're able to drive on that side. And if you don't have a leadership buy in, it's going to be very hard getting employee buy in. You need the leadership team to have clear enthusiasm, vision, clarity around what it is that they're trying to achieve, that we are trying to achieve as a company. And then you want to give the heads of departments autonomy to determine what is the best version of that for their specific teams. I'll give a specific example. At Athena, we went through this exercise and we basically came up with a structure and strategy. And we said, okay, AI strategy, the way that we're doing it is every department head has to be responsible for the rollout within their team and the right strategy, but there has to still be accountability at the leadership level. And so in the leadership team's performance reviews, the CEO is going to check and verify the effectiveness of their strategies and whether or not internally their teams have adopted AI to a degree that the CEO feels sufficient.
Mhm.
The reason why the differentiation was so important was on the engineering team, we learned they did not want people experimenting on their own with whatever tools, because that could meaningfully impact our setup on the back end with coding and everything like that. I don't know the specifics, okay? So they were like, no, no, no. We're going to pick our top 2 engineers. We're going to tell them, go experiment with these tools, come back and tell us what you learn. And then we at the top of the engineering team are going to dictate which tools people are going to start using and how. On the marketing team, however, there's that risk isn't there. And every sub function within marketing is so unique. You've got demand gen, you've got the content marketing, right? And they each need different tools and strategies. So our marketing leader said, no, 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 I'm not figuring this out myself. You all are mini, CEOs of your own little mini function, and you need to spend this quarter coming up with and experimenting with tools. Come back, tell me what you learn, advocate for what budget you think you need, and we'll make it happen. And so as you can see, those are 2 completely different strategies. And had I, as an HR person, said, we're going to have one strategy across the company, this is what it's going to be, and I'm going to tell you all the tools, it just
Mm.
wouldn't have worked. And so it's a very long-winded way of saying, start with getting buy-in at the leadership team level, and then have every department be in charge and responsible for the strategy of AI adoption within their department, because it is not a one size fits all. It's got to be tailored to the team's needs and circumstances.
Mm. And the accountability of the leadership team that obviously is owned by the CEO, or how do you partner with Roxanne on actually achieving that?
Yeah. So, no, it's definitely the CEO is the one who's having that conversation with them. The role that I'm playing is twofold. One is helping come up with that strategy in the first place, right?
Mhm.
So, not saying like, oh, yes, of course, I will run all of AI adoption. No, let's take a step back. Let's play that out. What happens if I own this? Do
Mhm.
you think I'm going to do an effective job of telling the engineers what they need? Probably not. So, what is a more effective structure? So,
Mhm.
that's one.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
second one is I am still building vibes, which I know sounds very generic, but what I mean by that is if we go back to the beginning, right? People were insecure about their jobs. People were scared to speak up about not knowing a thing. People were unclear about whether or not this was actually something they could use in their teams. Part of my job is really surfacing those fears so that we can acknowledge that at the company level, so that I can then coach my CEO to say, hey, at the all hands, you need to acknowledge this. You need to say, hey, all, thanks so much for your openness and vulnerability and candor during that conversation. We learned a lot. I want to acknowledge this probably is really scary.
Mhm.
And here's why I think it's also to your benefit.
Yeah.
I can't tell you that you're not going to need AI in your future. But what I can tell you is that with Athena, you're going to build the skills that you need to take you beyond Athena. Even
Yeah.
when you leave Athena one day, these skills are going to increase your market value and make it easier for you to get a job. And just like get people galvanized,
Yeah.
excited, motivated while acknowledging the very
Yeah.
real fears. I think what can often happen is employees feel like the CEO is out of touch. They don't
Mm.
understand what's going on. And hopefully normally not the case. It's just that all these unspoken things get replaced with assumptions by employees that start to make them feel demoralized, right? Like the CEO has unrealistic expectations because they don't understand the reality, right?
Mm.
And so to be able to partner with my CEO to say, here's what I learned from partnering with the team. Here's what I've done to help build that psychological safety, and here's what I need you to do to
Mm.
really supplement that and make that whole across the company.
Yeah, no, I think that's all. Thank you so much. That's really, really lots of really valuable insight. I think insights for the audience. Jesse, what's your take? What's your experience? Like, how do we bridge the adoption gap and start the transformation?
I mean, I think Melanie said it well. It's around the clarity, actually. And I think if we go back to like change management principles and like doing change well, a lot of the fears can be alleviated if you acknowledge them, if you actually talk about them. And I think that part of HR's role is that surfacing those and making it known to the people who need to address that and make it people feel comfortable about what's going on. I do think there's like culture for me is an outcome, and I do believe that the way in which we communicate and the way we talk about how we're going to adopt AI does affect culture and affects the way we think about AI and the way we think about our workplaces, and how good we feel at work and the kind of behaviors we have. So I think acknowledging those things and setting that at the top level is extremely important. I don't always think that everyone's in those positions believe that that's needed. Like, I think Melanie's in a very good position here where you have, a really great, CEO relationship, and it's very like looks like you work together really well. I think a lot of people have struggled with that, getting that, let's say, maybe being heard in that space. And so I think when that occurs, I think on the HR side, things that I've seen, work well, or things that people have done before in the past to get that stakeholder buy-in, because I think that's what we're all after here. Like, there's no point moving forward if we don't have people on board. And I think that's the critical part, deciding on the vision, but getting everyone on board on the vision. And HR being part of that story is important. So how to be part of that story when you're not maybe invited to it or you aren't as heard in that space. There's things that, we need to talk the business language generally, especially if that's how you acknowledge your leadership need that kind of business language. If they say, you need to, I hear this a lot from HR people. They say, well, they keep saying they want us to like be like the business, talk like the business. And it's like, what does that even mean? And so I think that's where we need to bring data insights in a way that makes sense for them to understand it. So highlighting these vibes that, Melanie touched on, making sure we have data, if we can get it, present it in a way that they understand. But I like to use a thing called an options paper. Sounds very scary, but it's not. It's kind of I'm going to say it's a traditional thing you do when you want buy-in on something, especially on a project. So a lot of, I've worked in really large organizations where, we're getting funding from the Australian government basically to like roll out massive Australia-wide projects, right? Like, how do you convince them that our money in Australia should be this project, right? Like, big stuff. And the way to do it is to present them with lots of ways that you could approach a topic, right? So if you're thinking about AI or thinking about how we're going to roll out stuff to the business, bringing data on different outcomes. And I think, Melanie, you kind of highlighted that's what you do. You say, well, we could play that through and see this option, like if I was the one to do the strategy, or we could look at like these other options. And, presenting the different pathways, I think, is a really powerful thing to do in HR, and having those options, option A, option B, and option C is also to do nothing, because sometimes just noting that we can also do nothing and these are the consequences, or this is what we think that the risks are of doing nothing or going this pathway, will actually convince someone that, oh, I don't want to go down that pathway, because you've presented them that pathway and they've got all these other better options. So it's like, oh, actually that's important. That's actually our business strategy. That actually makes a whole lot of sense. So now you go like presenting, employee engagement, and we want to do this, and we got to do a comp strategy to like, this is how we're moving the needle. This is how we're supporting the business. This is the way, I think we could go, and how that could play out in different scenarios. And then letting them have accountability of choice of direction. Because again, HR's not, I don't believe, should own the transformation of HR, of AI. I'm on Mel's page there. We don't own it. We are enablers, we're facilitators, but we do need to bring our, voice to the table. I think that's extremely important, that we need to be very vocal, especially when it comes to how AI is adopted, the impacts of those things. And we are that voice of, I'm going to say, reason a lot of the time. We just need to make sure we present it in a way that's heard with stakeholders. So that's a suggestion, can work well, but more or less, I agree with, Melanie's position there. Like, in how she's, done it with her company. I think it's fantastic that you actually have that play through in real life, not just in like scenario land. And maybe like, I think there's also a lot of power in having, there's top-down strategy and there's top-down change, but there's also like bottom-up change. And I think, if there's that combined, can be very powerful in change management. So it's like having your, strategy and your thing up here going on with your leadership, but also as like a team and as an individual, having those, bringing those ideas to the table, making space for that, bringing it up in meetings, helping yourself help you and the business is important as well. So I don't think it all rests at the leadership level. I think it's leadership has their job, and you as an individual also have a role to play in that, and how you decide to show up in this change happening across the globe in every workplace, right? And that's a very powerful combination when you can allow and see that both coming together. So
yeah,
so that was
so cool. Thank you so much. And I think those are all really, really helpful and insightful points for the audience. I would love for all of you to also check out the second poll in the chat. that maybe gives us also a bit of an understanding where the adoption sort of challenges lie in your respective organizations, maybe also insightful for you to see what others are struggling with. And I think we've heard already so many really, really insightful points as to what the people leadership or the HR team's role should be or shouldn't be. And I think it's interesting if we actually look at our latest research, many HR leaders are confident and maybe just picking up one piece of the puzzle. And I think we've spoken about the hard and honest conversations around what people know and maybe don't know or are afraid to ask. And when it comes to AI training, which probably also mean a bazillion different things. At least 8 out of 10 people leaders say their company will provide what employees need. So companies are investing into future-proofing the skills for their employees, which again, I agree with you, Melanie, which is such an important dimension that goes beyond one workplace. And I think it's also maybe a bit of a responsibility for employees these days to ensure people are staying competitive in the job market for wherever they want to go in the future. And I think there's an interesting tension that we've touched upon of obviously leadership or the executive team has to set the accountability, whereas the people team or the people leader can help to steer the conversation, to focus on the right things, to be aware of what the adoption gaps really are, to help setting the expectations, having the hard conversations, maybe helping with some of the systems and structures, strategies, incorporating questions into your review conversations to start the right conversations between maybe your CEO and your leaders or a manager and their employees. Um, and ultimately, where does that, like, what's the top 3 most powerful things that a people leader can do as an architect or co-architect or an anchor for an AI strategy? Like, where should you start? Where should you stop? What should you really truly focus on? Maybe we can just nail it down even further to make this really, really tangible advice and next steps for the audience.
Yeah, I'll say, start by figuring out what it is you're trying to achieve. Um, then before you finalize a plan, collect employee sentiment to understand what hurdles you are going to have to either work around, address, or incorporate into your strategy, and then figure out what that strategy is and be really, really loud about it to your employees. Be loud about what it is and be loud about what it isn't. One thing that we found, much to my confusion, but also then I learned, was when we said we want AI to help people do more, employees heard, okay, so I'm going to be working longer hours.
Mm,
And what we meant was, no, we want you to be doing more in the same amount of
mm,
hours, and we want you to be doing more of the work that you love and less of the work that you hate, and instead just automate that, right? We want to free up your creativity. We want to free up that mental load, and we want to maximize your impact. But we didn't say any of that the first time around, which actually leads me to that's the perfect version of things, in my
mm,
opinion. But I will say that to most CEOs' point, the risk of doing nothing out of fear of getting something wrong and trying to wait till you have the perfect approach is actually far worse, than doing something and making a mistake and then fixing it. I will be honest and say Athena's first iteration of AI adoption was not perfect. We threw spaghetti at the wall. We learned a lot of things. Some employees were upset. They talked about what they were upset about, but then we learned very quickly what it was they were upset about, and we were able
mm,
to iterate on that and get to the end stage that was much better, much faster. So I would say, okay, listen to all this advice, do it to the best that you
mm,
can. But if you're feeling frozen with indecision or like, "Oh, but I don't have an answer to this question. Oh, what if it leads to that thing?" Just do it. Just do it because you will learn faster through iteration than by waiting till you can get it perfect. Then you're gonna get the feedback. It's still not gonna be perfect and you will be behind. So it's better to have momentum than to do nothing and be transparent with your employees about that if that's the case. Like, "Hey, all, we recognize we're probably gonna make mistakes. The ask is to be loud about where you think we're getting it wrong." I'll say very specifically, we did a thing that really backfired. We put an AI assessment into people's perf reviews. In my head, it wasn't that scary. It was like, "Hey, talk about where in the AI journey you are so that
mm,
during your performance review, we can talk about, like, where have you leaked, like, which aspects of your role
mm,
have you leaned into AI, which aspects haven't you and why? And like, is it worth leaning in more? Is there a thing that, could solve that
Mhm.
problem? Employees heard this and thought, oh, so you're going to fire me if I'm not an AI expert. Yeah. And I was like, oh, dear Lord. Okay. We have not done enough work building
Mhm.
psychological safety.
Mhm.
Performance review was not the appropriate place
Mhm.
to put in this pulse check. But you know what? We surfaced all those uncertainties real quick when we did that. And then at that point was when we started running the psychological safety workshops, the trainings. And and we decided like, okay, we need to be clear that the accountability is at the VP level, not the individual level. So don't worry, nobody's going to fire. It is your VPs that are going to, make this happen. So I would say worst case scenario, just start. Just try something, make it happen. And then my last thought, and then I'll pass it over to Jesse, is I will say just for any HR people that are like panicked about like, am I enough of an AI expert? There are two things that I have learned throughout this time that I really stand by. One is, yes, we should be educating ourselves on HR on AI enough to be able to partner on adoption and like understand what the risks are and enable our employees. But no, I do not think that we got to where we are because we were technical experts, and that's the thing you need to do. You need to now become an AI wizard. And the best analogy I can think of for this is, you know, I don't think that anybody believes that they need to become an expert mechanic who can build an engine from scratch in order to drive a
Mhm.
car. The very reasonable expectation is somebody else is going to build that engine and be an expert on that. And what I need to know is enough about cars to identify the best car for my needs and then how to drive that car so I don't crash into a tree. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think it's the same for AI, right? Know enough to understand what tools you need to consider for your company. Where are you pressuring your vendors to give you more so that you're not having to build solutions from scratch? And then know enough to then implement that, know what's in the market, know that you're not giving me enough vendor. I'm going to be exploring this other vendor. So that's one. And then two, I will say that the biggest impact for me internally, I know there's a lot of pressure like HR, automate all your work streams. You should do some, but I've actually found that the biggest impact for me has actually been how can I automate other people's work streams so that I can free up their time to drive revenue? Very specific
Mhm.
example. I'm sure this isn't like mind blowing, but it had high impact. Our managers hate performance review time. It takes
Mhm.
so much time. So I just built them a custom GPT. I kid you not. I had Roxanne test it with me. I was like, Roxanne, just send me a voice memo answering two questions about one of your direct reports. What do you think they do great? Where do you think they have room to improve? Uploaded the transcript,
Mhm.
tell you that it spit out a whole beautiful performance review
Mhm.
just based on a voice memo. It was a 3-minute voice memo
Mhm.
because I had built it with all the tools. I had
Mhm.
given it the description.
Yeah.
I had given it our company values and performance standards. I had given it the template with instructions on like this section must do this. It must tie it back to the job description. It must give feedback in the SBI format. It must whatever. When I tell you that our manager's time was cut in half, if not more, and
Mhm.
and also the stress of having to start from scratch. And so I would personally think about like, our job as HR professionals is to drive performance across companies. And so what are you doing to drive performance across the company? Not necessarily what are you doing to automate your own work stream. Also important, but I would say not the priority.
Mhm. Yeah. Melanie, this was absolutely not staged, but as you mentioned that, like for folks that have Leapsome as their product, that kind of review assistant you can talk to or sort of like answer questions that like guides you, coaches you through a conversation that fills or like pre-fills a review template for you. Like that's kind of like the do you have to even build that custom GPT? But
Oh,
that
exactly what
that
I'm
we kind
talking
of
about,
stumbled
Jenny.
upon that. I do have to say that then.
Yes, I shouldn't have had to build that from
I
scratch. I
know,
should
yeah,
not have had to build that engine. I should have just bought the Leapsome car. You see?
I
So,
know.
okay,
Uh,
now I know. Now I know.
This
It's
is
like what
why I
you
need
wanna
to
do.
know the market and what's available.
Yes, Jesse. Yes.
I
Mhm.
think that's and maybe like jumping from like what you've said, Melanie. I concur. Like I agree with a lot of like basically everything you say. So that's great. I think one of the things that's hard for HR is that they're transforming themselves. They have to like look at how they do their work, and then they're looking at how they can help the organization deliver their work, right? So you've got twofold. You've got their transformation, the organization's transformation that they have their fingers in. And I think if you're looking at, where you're going to, three things, to think about, it's always communication. Like, I think everything that comes back to this is like create the clarity, give the guardrails, like make it clear that we're iterating, make it known that we don't know what we're doing and no one's really done this before. So we're just, we're trialing and there's going to be errors and we're going to mess up and we want to know when we mess up. So let's like do it together. I think that's really powerful in just saying those things and saying it often, because it gives that psychological safety. Actually, when you talk about the elephants in the room and you give space to those topics, then people actually start to be like, oh, well, we're trialing AI and we're not going to get fired if we like don't have the perfect thing. So I think communication is like number one. Second thing is prioritization. And I think, Melanie, you hit it on the nail. It's like you need to be knowing like what is the priority of the company right now? Where do we need to move the needle? Where is the company needing to add, efficiency or capacity, or we need to have more output to drive revenue? And that's something that HR need to be understanding, because that's like your number one. Basically, that's your business case. What does the business need? And how is HR going to make sure we get that? And how can you actually support the business doing that? Is it hiring more people because we need hands on the ground, and that is therefore we need to automate our recruiting or our contract automation and onboarding processes, right? So we get people into the company. Or is it simplifying performance reviews because our managers need more time to deliver, or whatever it might be? Have your priorities. And I totally believe in stack ranking priorities. Like nothing should have the same priority. Stack rank means there is a number one and there is only one number one. There is a number two and there is only one number two. And everyone should understand that prioritization in a business. And I think that's one very hard thing to get to in a business, actually. It sounds simple, but it's not. It's quite hard to get to. So that would be number two. And number three is that acknowledging that it's going to be messy. Like, I think that's okay. It's messy. We've really done this before. It's not like you have companies that have done this like 5 years ago and they already are like where we need to be. Like, this is a new recent thing. Every company has the same growing pains. No one is behind. Like, everyone thinks they're behind. No one is behind. I would say do something, but do it with like some thought. Like, I know, Melanie, like just go and go. And I'm like, do it, but do it with that comms, do it with some prioritization, some thought, and do it with like energy and fun. Like, why not? Like it just acknowledge it's going to be messy, structured messy, but like have fun with it, because it's not going anywhere. That's my 2 cents.
I think that's a lovely, lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Lovely take. Enjoy the mess to some extent, or embrace the mess. And there's another poll. Just quickly, would love to sort of like see your take. And I think unfortunately we're already at the end of our time here. And I think just double clicking on a couple of the takeaways. So the real risk is not AI itself, but AI ambition that potentially creates pressure without this right sort of guardrails and strategies in place to ultimately get from AI ambition to AI impact for both the business and the people. And the important role of HR that I think we've touched upon here a few times is to really help and be that partner to the business, to the CEO, to help to generate a lot of clarity. So that might mean the AI strategy, the guardrails, sort of like some system as how we embrace AI as a company, or embrace the mess. The second one is like to some extent it's also like setting the right or evolving the right culture, having the honest conversation, making sure that it's okay to fail along the way, at times throwing the spaghetti at the wall and seeing what happens, what sticks. So really helping to set the right culture and having those honest conversations. I think that's the second takeaway. Maybe holding your leader accountable to hold their leaders accountable. I see a lot of nodding. So that's the third one. And I think the other two I wrote down is maybe really also helping the organization with creating the space and the strategies for training, experimentation. Maybe there's a lot of like, let departments figure out what works best in their realm to really get it right. But also always like making sure we focus on real problems, real priorities, and making sure that we stay focused and like with tight priorities, because we can't do everything all at the same time. I think those are hopefully some tangible takeaways for our audience. thank you so much to both of you for sharing all these really, really great insights. And for everyone else, please check out our workforce trends report that should be in your inbox, as there might be some additional food for thought and tangible sort of like next steps for you. So thank you all for listening in. Thank you to our great speakers, and hope to see you again.
Thanks so much.
Thanks all.